Welcome to episode 82 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes. Now, it's probably fair to say that in the cycle touring world, middle-aged men are somewhat overrepresented. At least their voices are. And obviously, I include my own in that particular group. So it's always good to feature a younger female voice on the podcast, and Joanna Chmara is a good example. She's from Poland, and she has a particular interest in cycling in Central and Eastern Europe. I asked Joanna to start by introducing herself.
Okay, so my name is Joanna. I'm from Poland, and I am an author of a blog about cycle touring that's called wobbly.com. I got into cycle touring 6 years ago, and it was actually just because one day when I was cycling to visit my parents for a weekend, I was just passing by a beautiful lake that is not far from my parents' home. And there was like a beautiful, beautiful sunset that I saw. And I just had this thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to just see a beautiful sunset from a bike every day, but from a different place? And that's when like the thought of bicycle touring first popped into my head. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anyone that did it. But when I arrived at my parents' place, I just started Googling, looking for ways to like carry your stuff on a bike and travel by bike, because to me it seemed like impossible carrying everything like in a backpack or wherever. And then I found out, oh, there's actually stuff like panniers or bike touring or bikepacking. And that's when I started like getting interested in the topic. And then it took me a few months to organize my first bicycle tour.
Okay, well, we'll come to your bike tours in a few minutes because you've visited a lot of places, especially in the eastern part of Europe. Obviously, that makes sense because you're based over there. But just before we do that, have you always been a cyclist? Did you always have a bicycle when you were growing up?
I did have a bicycle when I was growing up. That was kind of a typical thing in Poland, that every kid, when we had this like first communion, because Poland is quite a Catholic country, so every kid had this like first communion when we were like 8 or 9 years old, and that's when you usually would get your first proper bike. So I had a bike, but I wasn't very much into cycling for most of my youth. Like I wasn't a sporty kid. My parents are quite outdoorsy. They love mountains, they love hiking, but like that was it when it comes to me and sports. And then when I was in my 20s, I got into running, and after that I got into cycling, mostly because I made some friends who cycled a lot, and I started cycling with them when I was in my 20s. I started cycling to work as well. So each day, like 10 kilometers one way to work. And that's how I got properly into cycling.
Do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'm turning 33 next month.
Okay, so you've been cycling for what, since you were about, cycle touring since you were about 25, 26, something like that?
27.
27, okay. Do you have a job apart from the cycling?
Of course I do. Yes, I couldn't really provide myself just with cycling and writing about it, I guess. Or maybe I could, but for now that's not the case. So right now I am a freelancer and I teach Norwegian online.
Oh, right. That's interesting. How did you learn Norwegian?
So that was that's what I studied for my bachelor's. I chose Scandinavian studies just because I was very interested in languages in general. And my first idea was to study German, but then I thought I already know German well enough. I'm already proficient in it. So why wouldn't I learn a new language? And then in Gdańsk, which is close to my hometown. They had this program for Scandinavian studies, and because I was always kind of fascinated with Norway, I thought, why not? That sounds like quite an exotic language, something a bit niche. So I said, okay, I'm just gonna try and study it. And yeah, that's how I learned it, basically from zero. I have never been in Norway before I started studying, and then I started visiting the country more often and learned the language.
How many different languages do you speak?
So Polish is my mother tongue, and then English, German, Norwegian, and Russian. But Russian I'm still learning.
Okay. Now, obviously, they're going to be very, very useful when you're traveling around, especially in Eastern Europe with Russian and German and the Scandinavian, the knowledge of Norwegian, obviously useful in Scandinavia. You talked about the initial inspiration one day seeing the sunset. How long was it between seeing that sunset and actually deciding to go off on your first long cycle ride?
I think that was about like 6, 7 months. I think this aha moment was somewhere in autumn. And then my first bicycle tour was in early May next year. So I went to Ukraine, to Western Ukraine with my friend, and that was a 2 week long trip in the Carpathian Mountains. And after that trip, I knew that was it. I knew that was something that I want to do more. So a week later, I delivered my notice at my job at that time. And I said, I'm leaving for like, I don't know how long and I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just bringing my bike with me and I'm going to see where I end.
That's quite a courageous thing to do, to suddenly decide to stop your job and go off cycling. Were you nervous?
I was very nervous. I remember the day before my first trip, I was like sitting in my room at my parents' place because I had to move out of my apartment. So I brought all my stuff to my parents' place, and then 3 days later, I was leaving for my first bicycle tour. I was sitting like in the middle, like surrounded by all the gear, all the camping stuff, cycling gear, clothes that I was supposed to pack. And I basically started crying because I was like, what the hell am I even doing? Like, why did I do that? This is stupid. Like, I don't have a job now. I'm going somewhere. I don't know how I'm gonna make it on my own because my first bicycle tour was, of course, with my friend. So I had someone to like to share it with, like all the struggles, all the issues. But yeah, I I just said, okay, I don't have much choice now. Like I quit my job. I'm not gonna go back to my boss and say, give me my job back. So I need to do it. I need to see how it goes.
On your website, you talk about something called the threshold mile. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, so this is the concept. I didn't come up with it myself. I think I'm not sure who was the author of it or where I read it first time, but I think that was one of like other cycle travelers. So this is the thing that before every trip, I always panic. I always have this thought like, maybe I wouldn't go, maybe I stay. So it doesn't really matter how long the trip is. It could be just a couple of days. Or if it's a longer tour far from home, then of course it's even worse. But even like for a week long trip, I have this moment of like for panic when I'm like, maybe I'm gonna pretend that I'm sick and I'm not gonna go. Or maybe I'm gonna be late for my flight or for the train or whatever. Maybe I can get out of it. And then once I leave my house, once I put the panniers on the bike and I start cycling, it all disappears and it all seems like, oh no, this is the most normal thing to do. So for me, no experience that I had during that trip was is more difficult than what I have before I leave my home. It changes a bit over time. It becomes like smaller and smaller, but it doesn't completely disappear. So it doesn't matter like if it's my first trip or my 15th trip. I still feel it sometimes. So that's what I mean by the threshold mile. It is the longest step that you need to take during your trip, and the hardest one.
Yeah, I think most people who've ever set off on a long cycle ride or even a short cycle ride will probably sympathise with what you're saying there, because you're right. It is that initial getting out of the house with the bike and actually setting off. Sometimes that feels like the most difficult part of the whole thing. The rest of it, once you've actually set off and you're cycling down the road and you're appreciating the countryside and all the places that you're visiting, yeah, those are the easy bits. But the first bit, making the decision and then pushing the bike over the threshold and starting cycling, that is the most difficult part of it, I suppose. So you said that your very first trip, the trip to Western Ukraine, you did that with a friend or friends. Why then did you suddenly decide to do the next one after you'd quit your job? Why did you decide to go by yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was because I knew I wanted to do a longer, and I knew that mostly I'm not gonna find someone who wants to travel for that long with me. Like none of my friends could do that at the time. I also didn't want to commit to doing something with someone for such a long time because like the trip turned out to be like 3 months long. Of course, like I originally thought it would be even longer, but it was 3 months long. And I just thought it gives me all the flexibility that I want if I go on my own. So if I say, oh, I like this place, I would like to stay here for a bit longer, I just stay for as long as I want, and nobody is going to complain that let's go further, let's see more stuff. I could basically do whatever I wanted. And the other thing was, I also wanted to test myself a little bit. I knew if I do it on my own, then I'm going to be sure that I can do it myself, that I don't need anyone to help me. Well, of course, people help you along the way, but I don't need to rely on anyone, and I can still make it. And I think that was part of it as well, this challenge of doing it on my own. But mostly that was just practicality. I just knew that doing this with someone for such a long time would be quite challenging, like mentally challenging, because I kind of enjoy being on my own. I'm very independent, and I I love sharing events with people, but I don't want to be forced to give up on some of my plans just because someone else doesn't want to do exactly what I want to do. And especially in cycling, I have this a lot, that I absolutely love long days on a bike on my own. And then if I'm traveling solo, and then every now and then, of course, you meet other cyclists and you share 1, 2, 3 days with them. It's it's extremely enjoyable to do that. But then you have your own journey, they have their own journey, and I don't know, it just makes sense for me. Um, right now I love doing cycle tours with some of my friends or my family as well. But yeah, but still, the solo tours, there is something to them that's just completely different. I think you're also like more open to other people. People are more keen on talking to you as well, because if you're traveling, for example, as a couple or with someone, with a group, you're kind of like a closed universe. You're separate from what's on the outside. When you're alone, you're kind of forced to interact with other people.
I think you've just summarised that perfectly. I think you've just basically listed every good reason to be a solo cyclist, and I think, I think I've never heard anybody do that so well and so completely as the list of things that you've just come up with. Because I agree 100% with what you've just said. Where was that first solo cycle tour? Where did you go from? Where did you go to? And how long did it take you?
So I started in Switzerland, and the reason I did that is because I wanted to visit some old friends of mine who live there. And I stayed there for a couple of days, like in the Swiss Alps, where I was already cycling a bit, but also like I had some time to cycle the mountains, the mountain passes without all the luggage, which was super nice. And from there, I decided to head east. So I went through Italy, Austria, Slovenia, to Croatia and Bosnia. And in Bosnia, my trip actually ended because I also got an injury. So I was originally thinking I'm gonna make it to Greece, but it didn't work out because I messed up my knee completely.
So, how long did it take you to get from Switzerland down to Bosnia?
So the whole trip from Switzerland to Bosnia, that would be about 2 months, a bit longer than 2 months. So I stayed in Switzerland for quite a long time. And then it took me 2 months, but I was also volunteering along the way. So I was using this platform that's called Workaway to find some volunteering gigs in like where you can basically work and get accommodation and food in return. So I stayed for some days in the Italian Alps in Val di Sole, just picking some berries on a farm in the mountains, which was amazing because we had a lovely group of volunteers there. So there was also this sense of like community, just doing something together. And it felt nice to have a break from cycling to just recover physically as well, before heading off again. And then in Bosnia, I worked on a mountain hut near Sarajevo, a mountain hut with no like electricity, no running water, completely off grid. But yeah, it was also lovely because I could meet a lot of people from like the outdoor community in Sarajevo. So that was something different, I would say.
I think you've already touched on this already. Your cycling style, you mentioned panniers, you mentioned camping. What kind of cyclist are you?
That's a cool question because I am someone who doesn't really sign up to any labels too much. I'm very like I do a little bit of that, a little bit of that. I'm constantly like changing what I do, and I don't like to get attached to any like ideology beyond cycling, I would say, because, for example, yes, I travel with panniers, and that's mostly because I am terrible at making choices and being minimalistic. I'm always overpacking notoriously, and I never learn not to do that. So panniers just give me the space to actually do that and not to worry about it. I always regret my choices. I always regret that I took too much because it gets too heavy. But still, I cannot really change it right now. I would love to try more lighter bike packing. So for example, this weekend I'm planning to go to the mountains, like the Karkonosze Mountains on the border with Czechia and Poland. And I'm doing that for a weekend only, so I'm planning to just take as little stuff as possible. But yeah, so my style is, you mentioned, yes, camping, but I also don't camp all the time. I'm sometimes tired of wild camping, for example. So if I have the opportunity, I sometimes just stay in a hotel or like in a B&B, something affordable if I can find it along the way, just to have shower, just to have a good night's sleep in a bed, and just to be able to enjoy wild camping the night after. Because if I did it all the time, I think I would just get so tired of it. And I know there are some people who are like super like heuristic or conservative when it comes to that, and they're like, yeah, you just do your trip with the tent, with wild camping for yourself. You spend as little money as possible. And yes, I'm trying to be smart with my money. I'm trying not to spend too much. But then also sometimes I just like a little bit of convenience. If, of course, like if it's possible. If I'm in remote areas where it's difficult to find something, I'm more than happy to wild camp actually. I love doing that, especially like in the mountains, because it gives you also like a unique experience, like that the mornings when you wake up in a tent and you're already out there, right? You're already out in nature. That's just something absolutely beautiful. So I love that. But yeah, I think to sum it up, my style is just no style. I just kind of do whatever feels right at the moment.
A lot of your cycling has been in Central and Eastern Europe. Are there particular attractions to cycling in Central and Eastern Europe that you think are different from the experiences people get in Western Europe? Obviously, you're based in Poland, so that makes it more logical that you should do more of your cycling over there. But a lot of people listening to this probably never venture further east than Switzerland, Austria at the most. So, what are the attractions of Eastern Europe?
So I think it's primarily the nature, because Western Europe, of course, it has beautiful nature too, but it is much more urbanized, much more developed. Everything is somehow like changed by our civilization, right? There's very few places where you have like really, really impact, really real nature, I would say. So my absolutely favorite region to cycle in is the Balkans. And that's because you have so much wilderness there. You have so many beautiful mountain ranges that are completely untouched, or where there's no mass tourism, where it feels more remote. It feels like you're far from everything. And there's also much more freedom, as in like the regulations are not that strict, the laws are not that strict. So for example, like if you go to Belgium or France or Netherlands and you want to go wild camping, you have to be very, very careful not to get a fine for that, or there's not even space for that. While if you're in Bosnia, in Albania, in North Macedonia, um, there's just so many places where you can just pitch your tent, and there's no one bothering you. There's just this freedom, and the same concerns, well, Central Eastern Europe, I would say. So for example, Poland is sort of in the middle, but still we have so much untouched nature, especially in the east, where you can just go with your bike, go with your tent, and just enjoy kilometers of beautiful forests or lakes or rivers that are completely different than, for example, the rivers in the west, which are completely regulated, completely changed. For example, in Albania, I cycled along this river that's called Vjosa, and it's often called the last wild river of Europe, because there's almost nothing done to it, like by by humans. There is no dams. The course of the river is unregulated. There is so much biodiversity there that it just looks completely different than any river in Western Europe. So that's that's part of the charm, I think. Also the culture, the mentality is a bit different. So especially in the Balkans, I think people are so open, um, so kind, so willing to share what they have, and especially in the countries that are less touristy, like for example North Macedonia or Albania, um, they're just amazed that someone from from abroad even came there by bike and is cycling there, and they're like, "Oh, why are you even here?" And they just want to share everything with you or have a chat with you, and that's just so sweet, so nice. That's just something that you wouldn't experience cycling in France or Spain or Belgium.
Do you prepare your trips? Do you plan them in a lot of detail? Do you take maps with you, or do you just kind of head off for somewhere and set off in the direction of, I don't know, a river or the coast or somewhere else? What's your What's your kind of style of planning?
I'm very bad at planning. I cannot do that. Like for me, it's either now or not now. So things that I'm not supposed to do now just feel so remote to me that I cannot really make a like cohesive plan. And the same like concerns my trips. So for example, I usually have a rough plan because especially if I have limited time, I need to know something. But I usually just make a very, very rough plan and then I mostly wing it. I change it day by day. And so usually it looks like I plan, for example, 2, 3 days of my trip before I leave. And after that, it's just sitting down in the evening and saying, okay, what do I do tomorrow? So I know more or less which direction I'm taking. But then I also often change my directions. So, for example, 2 years ago when I was in Albania, I was there for 3 weeks. And my original plan was, yeah, I do a bit of Albania, then a bit of Kosovo, and I had some route that I wanted to do. But then I said, nah, I kind of like it in this region. I might stay longer in this region. And then I completely skipped Kosovo in the end. And then I had this plan to go to some mountains, but then I was just too exhausted to do it. So I changed it um in the morning that I was supposed to like head off towards those mountains. So I don't like to be too attached to any plans, and especially in places that are a bit wilder with like higher mountains or with more unpredictable weather. That's also something that you have to do because yeah, sometimes the conditions are just super difficult, and you might have the best plan, but you're only able to do 30 kilometers because, for example, it's snowing or it is like 42 degrees. So I just embrace the unpredictability, I guess.
And that connects with what you were saying earlier about being a solo cycle tourist, in that you have the freedom to make those decisions. If you wake up, like you say, and you don't fancy climbing a mountain, you can go in a different direction. Or if you want to stop for a few days and do nothing, then you are the only person who has to live with the decision that you've taken.
Exactly. I don't think there's a lot of people who could actually survive cycling with me exactly because of that, because I'm changing my plans way too much and think that would be frustrating for most people, especially over like longer time. For like a week to, yeah, that's okay. But for longer tours, I don't think someone cycle with me for like a couple of months.
Quick question about your bike. I can see a picture of it, kind of. It's quite a small picture. Tell me about your bike. Is it a touring bike, or is it a bike you've had for a long, long time? Is it a new bike?
So it is a mountain bike and I've had it for 5 years now. So when I started touring, I had a hybrid bike. And that was a bike that I had before touring. That was just my bike for commuting, for Sunday rides, and yeah, for this kind of stuff. And I just installed like a luggage rack on it. And yeah, that was it. But then a year after I started touring, I decided to go for a mountain bike. And that was because I was planning a tour in Kyrgyzstan, which is famous for terrible roads. And I wanted to have something with a bit wider tires, with a better suspension, just for a better comfort of the ride. So my bike is yeah, it's a mountain bike, hardtail with 29 inches wheels, which is also lovely because they roll so nicely. Once you get them rolling, you just keep on going. But it's absolutely terrible to pack. For example, if you're flying and you need to pack your bike in a box, it's absolutely terrible because the wheels are just too big, and also the handlebar is super wide. So I hate that. So I'm trying to avoid flying if I can.
Yeah, taking your bike on a plane is just is the worst thing, and I've done it 2, 3 times, and I've hated every moment of it. So yeah, I think if you're staying in Europe, then the best thing to do is just to put your bike on the train. In fact, you've written something for your website, haven't you, about cycling and using trains in Europe?
Yes, I have. I wrote this article about taking bicycles on trains in Europe because, yeah, first of all, I always struggle finding the information on that. So I said, okay, I'm just gonna spend a few days putting together all my knowledge that I have, like from my own experience, and then researching what I can find online, and just put it together into like a whole guide for that, so that people traveling in Europe with bikes can have a little bit easier life. But then I'm also quite aware that the reality and the theory are two different things. So sometimes I check the website of some railways and they're like, yeah, of course we take bikes, everything. Yeah, there's gonna be a special car with bicycle racks and everything. And then you get on the train and the reality is just terrible. So recently I went to Estonia and Latvia from Poland, and Estonia is absolutely amazing for taking bicycles on trains. I loved it. It was super modern. It was so easy to get on the train with the bike because it was low floor, wide doors, a lot of space. But to go to Estonia, I had to take a bus from Warsaw. So first I had to take a train from Gdańsk to Warsaw. And on that train, there was so little space for the bikes that I just struggled so much putting my bike on this hoop. So yeah, trains are an amazing means of transportation with the bikes, but a lot of them in many European countries are still not really prepared for the bikes. So it is always a hassle as well. So no matter what you do, no matter how you want to get to a place with the bike, it's always a pain in my experience. It's never smooth. So planes are terrible because you need to pack the bike. Trains are terrible because sometimes there is not enough space and it's just difficult to board the train with the bike. Car, yeah, how you go back to the car then after the tour. So there's no good solution for that, I guess. The best thing is if you can just cycle all the way.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think traveling by train is always a bit of a lottery with your bicycle, but I suppose it's a lottery where you've got a better chance of winning than if you take a plane, I think.
Yes, I guess so. It's less bothersome because with planes, well, you have to get to the airport with the bike in a box. That's already, and then you never know if your bike doesn't get damaged or anything. So yeah, and then you have to assemble the bike after you arrive. So I guess it is a lot of pain to have, but on the other hand, yeah, well, it's just part of the trip. So you just have to be prepared for that. You have to take some extra time before your departure and after your arrival to just, yeah, figure it out.
No, I would always much prefer to spend 12 hours sitting on a train with my bike than I would for to spend 1 hour in a plane thinking about the horrors of having to reassemble the bike when I get to the other end. So yeah, give me a train any day. Now, of all the countries that you've visited, and I think it's about 22 countries that you've visited, which of those countries would you would you put at the top of your list of recommendations for cycling?
Hmm. So my number one, I guess, would be Albania. It's also maybe because I spent a lot of time there, so I kind of know it well. It is what I love about it is just it's so wild that it doesn't feel like Europe anymore. You have the kind of adventure that's comparable to, for example, what I experienced in Kyrgyzstan, which was completely different, a bit like more off the beaten path, a bit more of just unpredictability and amazing hospitality as well. I also loved Bosnia for the same reasons. And also Bosnia has some weird kind of melancholic charm, which I guess it just comes from the very tragic history that's not so long ago. So it's still alive there. And of course, it is heartbreaking what happened there, and I guess the society still feels that a lot, and the political situation is still far from stable, I would say. But I absolutely loved the people there. So they were just so open, so kind, and so, I don't know, just there was something different there that I felt all the time. And I always think, like, for example, people are going to approach you if you're traveling alone through the countryside. That's something that I take for granted. But then if I was wandering around Sarajevo, people would still approach me as well, just to see, okay, where are you from? What you doing here? And just to tell me their life story. And this is just something that, yeah, you don't experience everywhere. And of course, the nature in Bosnia is absolutely stunning. So the mountains there are still super wild, and you have so many small roads or gravel tracks in the mountains where you can just enjoy riding your bike completely alone for hours, not meeting a living soul. And yeah, that's something that's just a completely different experience. And then let's say number three would be who? Slovenia or Switzerland. I loved Switzerland as well, but Switzerland is like, yeah, you just expect it to be breathtaking, right? You have amazing views everywhere, and the roads are awesome, and there are some very good cycle routes. Yeah, so this is the kind of adventure that's more like for when you want to just ride your bike and enjoy the nature. And I think Slovenia is a bit similar. Like, it's very, very spectacular as well. Like, the Alps in Slovenia are amazing. But Slovenia is something like in between East and West. So if you are someone who's traveled in Western Europe only by bike and want to do something a little bit different, I would say Slovenia is a perfect place like for the first trip outside, because it has a bit of this like Balkan spirit, but it's a bit more organized, a bit more structured. Everything is super clean and developed. And I think this is something that, like, where you won't experience like this shock that you might experience when you first come to, let's say, North Macedonia or Bosnia, and you're traveling through the mountains and you see, for example, piles of trash, and you're like, oh, that's a bit, yeah. Or you feel like it's a bit too extreme. You have, for example, a road that goes for like 30, 40 kilometers through the mountains, and there is no shops, no villages, no water, and it just feels a bit like more challenging. So Slovenia is something that's like perfectly in between East and West.
Yeah, that's interesting. I only have experience of one afternoon of cycling in Slovenia, but everything I hear and read about cycling in Slovenia and traveling in Slovenia is very, very positive. So I kind of, in my mind, I think of it perhaps as a cheap version of Switzerland in terms of the mountains, in terms of the facilities. But yeah, I should go back there and find out for sure. So those are the at the top of the list: Albania, Bosnia, Slovenia, Switzerland. At the other end of the list, which are the countries or which are the places that you've visited where you think, oh, this is a bit disappointing? I was expecting something a bit better than this, or you came away thinking, right, okay, well, I'm glad I've been there, but I'm not going to go back.
Yeah, so bike wise, especially, I would say Malta. So I have a lot of experience cycling around Malta because in the last 2 years I've been there for many, many months actually. And Malta is an amazing little country with beautiful architecture, stunning history, amazing nature, but it's completely overrun. It's very car centric, and cycling there should be, on paper, should be perfect because the island is like from one end to the other is like 35 kilometers. So you would expect people to use bikes as transportation, but it's just so car centric. There is more cars on the island than there are inhabitants. which makes it super dangerous to cycle. And the infrastructure is absolutely terrible. So I volunteered a bit with some NGO in Malta that's called Toyota, and they're advocating for safer bicycle infrastructure. So I got this like firsthand experience of like seeing like how bad it is, not just from what I see, but from like the conversations with policymakers. On paper, Malta should be perfect for cycling because also it's a sunny country. There's like over 300 sunny days in a year there. So you would think, oh, there's no better place for cycling than Malta. But unfortunately, it's not. So yeah, so that's one of the countries in Europe that I would call least cycle friendly. And apart from that, huh, I don't know. No, actually, I don't really have. Well, Malta can still be a very, very nice experience on a bike, especially if you go to the smaller island Gozo, which has much less cars, which is much nicer to bike. But yeah, that's definitely my least favorite country in Europe for biking. Everything else, no, I don't think I have any disappointments. Like, I think also every country has something special. It's like sometimes some are more exciting than the others, then some are more bike friendly than others, but there's still something beautiful that you can find everywhere. So for example, recently I visited Estonia, and particularly the coast and the islands, and I found it a bit boring because it was super flat, and I love the mountains. I love cycling in the mountains. I don't care if I have to push my bike uphill. In the mountains is just where I feel like at home. And Estonia was just super flat. But then you had so much greenery. It was so quiet. There were so many birds, so few people. And yeah, and then I just said like, yeah, it is not the most exciting country to cycle in, but it's certainly not a country that I wouldn't go back. I still enjoy it, and especially like if you're, for example, like if you're feeling exhausted, if you're feeling overstimulated, cycling through the Estonian forest is just like such a peaceful experience.
There are a few countries that are not on your list: France, Britain, for example, Turkey. I don't think you've been to Turkey. Are these places that you would like to visit, or are you happy in your kind of comfort zone of Eastern and Central Europe?
No, I absolutely would love to. So I've been to France, but not on bike. I've done some like I've done like a little road trip in Normandy, and I loved it. I also visited the mountains up north. So yeah, it's not that I wouldn't like to go. I absolutely would love to. Yeah, sometimes there's not enough time for like everything, and the same goes for the UK. I actually planned to go to Scotland this year, but then the plane tickets got so expensive, like before I managed to book them, that I just said, okay, no, maybe I do the Baltics this year and I do Scotland another time. Because yeah, no, I would love to go to the UK. I've actually never been, which is super weird. I always wanted to visit when I lived in Brussels because it was so close by, but then my time in Brussels was during COVID, so traveling wasn't the easiest.
So, what are your plans for the future? Where are you going next? And have you got any plans for epic trips, perhaps around the world, something like that?
Yeah, I do have a few things that are still on my list. So first of all, there is the Pamir Highway in Tajikistan, or like in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. And this is something that I wanted to do in 2020, but then COVID hit and completely changed my plans. And since then, like there was always something in a way. So yeah, this is something that I definitely want to do. This is like one like of my biggest dreams because it's one of the most remote roads in the world. I would love to do Transdinarica Trail in the Balkans, which is like a new cycle route that just has been launched. I think it's launching today, if I'm correct. And this is just like a project that multiple Balkan countries did together just to connect all the countries together or set up a route through the most beautiful places in the region. So this is something that I would love to do as well. And yeah, as I mentioned, Scotland is on the very top of my list. I would love to visit Southeast Asia as well. I would love to cycle in, for example, Malaysia or in the Philippines or in India, but that's a bit like bigger project, and I'm not in a very big rush to do them. I'm gonna do that sooner or later. It's not also not a priority. So if I only had one bike trip that I can do in my life, that if you told me, okay, you have 2 months left and you can do one trip, that would be the Pamir Highway for
And hopefully you will get to the Pamir Highway soon. Will you do that solo? Will you go on your own?
Cool. Yeah, I wanted to. I'm a bit uncertain about that because this is a very challenging tour. I might team up with someone to do it. So I'm not very attached to the idea of doing it on my own. I might also just start it on my own and then most likely meet some cyclists along the way and just, team up for a couple of days with some people and do that this way because I know that's what usually people do over there. There's only one road that you can take, and so all the cyclists traveling the Pamir Highway in every at a certain time they always end up cycling together. So I don't know yet. I might do that on my own unless I have someone who has exactly the same plan and wants to do that with me and has a bit of a similar style of cycling as I do.
I think it's probably, I've got to be careful what I say here, but I think it's probably fair to say that the majority of solo cyclists are male. Obviously, you are female. What advice would you give to a female person, a young female person particularly, who was interested in going off and cycling by themselves, perhaps in the kind of places that you've visited? What advice would you give them to encourage them?
I would say don't listen too much to people who don't know what they're talking about. So of course, listen to advice of people who did it, but don't listen to your aunt Katie who says, "Oh no, this is dangerous. Don't go to this country because it's dangerous." Because they're just projecting their fears onto you. Expect to be scared and just do it scared. Because I think, of course, it's partially society that makes us feel scared as women, but partially it's also there are different dangers that women face than men. And of course, you have to be aware of that. You have to have some sort of idea what you're comfortable with. It's good to push yourself out of your comfort zone, but you don't have to leave the comfort zone 500 kilometers behind. It's and by that I mean if you want to start traveling alone, for example, the thought of wild camping on your own terrifies you, and you're like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Then maybe don't do wild camping. Maybe try to figure out a route where you can stay on established campsites or sleep in a hotel, and then just try to do that slowly to get used to it, right? So, for example, go for an overnighter somewhere near your home, set up a camp there, and just see how it feels, and just do slow exposure. Yeah, another advice that I would give is to just connect with other female cyclists and just ask their advice. So, for example, there are great groups on Facebook, for example, Bike Touring Women or something like that. I don't remember the exact name of the group. And there's there are a lot of women with different experiences. They're sharing their tips, their experiences, asking questions. And yeah, this can give you a better idea of what you can expect in a place or during a tour, or this can just give you a completely different perspective than when you ask a male cyclist. Because, for example, if I ask a male cyclist, how is cycling in Kyrgyzstan? Is it safe? They're going to be like, yeah, sure, I felt perfectly fine. But then if you ask a female cyclist, they might say, yeah, it's great, but I had a few sketchy situations. And then you know more what you can expect. So yeah, if I could just sum it up, the first advice is like, don't listen to people who don't know what they're talking about. Listen to people with experience, and yeah, know what your boundaries are, know where your comfort zone ends, and just try to expand it a little bit, try to leave it a little bit, but not necessarily go too far from your comfort zone at once. Don't try to completely prove yourself too much at once.
I'm going to quote again from your website. You've written, "No geography or history lesson, no book or film has taught me as much about the world as random encounters on the road."
Yeah. So this is something that I wrote it quite a while ago, and I still stand by it. But I think it's not 100% what I believe in today. Well, it is, but I would explain what I mean by that. So I think when you watch the news, when you read books about different countries, you learn a lot about them, but you learn about a certain aspect of them. So you learn a lot about like politics or like general like tendencies in society. But then you arrive in the country and you just realize people are just people everywhere. And of course, what you read in the news is true, but it's not everything. So I'm not saying what a lot of travel YouTubers or influencers are saying. For example, they're like, oh no, I'm going to show you this country's real face because the news is lying. So the news isn't lying, or the geography books or the history books aren't lying, but there is more to that. The reality is a bit different when you see it when you're there than when you view it from like through the lens of a camera, for example. And the other thing is, I'm also a person that's learning by doing. So if I try to remember what is the capital of whatever, Malta, let's say, and I've never been there, I don't associate the capital with anything, I'm not going to remember it. And then I go there and I just remember it because I've been there. So I think traveling by bike is just a great lesson of geography because you're just like slowly experiencing different parts of the country. You're slowly memorizing the map. You're slowly learning, okay, this is what, like where those mountains are, this is what is here. And just by doing it more actively, I think it's just more engaging, just more easy to remember. So yeah, that's also what I meant by that.
If people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way they can contact you and discover more about your experiences and perhaps even contact you for a conversation to be inspired for their own solo adventures?
Yeah, I'm always happy to help people. And I recently actually had someone contacting me because they were planning a trip to Albania and they had some questions and they just actually messaged me and said, could we have a phone call? And I was so happy to do that because that's just very, very fulfilling to know that your blog is helping someone and that you can share the experience with someone. So yeah, the easiest way is just to leave me a message through the contact form on my blog or message me on Instagram. That's the easiest. I usually try to reply as fast as I can. And yeah, if you need a chat, if you need to ask some questions, if you need some reassurance about your plans, that's where I might be able to help. Yeah, just message me, say like, can we have a phone call? Can I message you? That's always fine with me. I'm always happy to do that.
And what is the website? What is the Instagram handle?
So the Instagram handle is Chmara, which is Chmara. That's my last name plus letter A. And the website is wobblyride.com.
What made you call it wobblyride.com?
I had a hard time figuring out what my blog should be called. And then that was one of the ideas that I had, because I find all my trips a bit wobbly. And by that, I mean, they are never perfect. They are never exactly as I imagine them to be. There's always some unexpected events. There's always something going wrong. But but I just make it, and in the end, and I just I just thought that was like a fun way to put it, like wobbly ride. Basically, the way I ride is a bit wobbly, but not in a literal sense. It's just more, there's just so many ups and downs. There are just so many things that are not properly working. So if you look at some Instagram accounts about cycling or cycle touring, and then you see all those like smooth shots of people riding, and everybody's setup looks so sleek and so good and so well organized. That's not how I work at all. So for me, it's pure chaos. So I said, yeah, that's how I could describe it. That's a wobbly ride that I'm having.
That sounds like the perfect name for a website. So, yeah. And from what I've heard in the last hour, I think that sums up extremely well your style of cycle touring, which I think is fantastic. I've really enjoyed chatting. So thank you for that. And good luck in your future journeys on and off the bike.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure to meet you and to chat about touring. Always fun to exchange the experiences.
Thank you to Joanna for taking the time to have that chat. You can visit her website, just to repeat it, wobblyride.com. That's Wobbly, Wobbly, ride, RIDE.com. And her Instagram handle is at CHMARAA, so double A at the end, and you'll find her on Instagram. So thanks to Joanna for taking the time to have the conversation. That is it for episode 82 of the Cycling Europe podcast. If you'd like to get in contact with the podcast, you can do so by visiting cyclingeurope.org/contact. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that by visiting cyclingeurope.org/support. And as always, if you'd like to give a rating or a review on the podcast platform where you happen to be listening to this on, then please do. It would be much appreciated. So thank you for listening. Episode 83 will be out at some point soon. I'm off to Shetland and Orkney in the middle of August, so it could be that the next episode is actually me cycling up on those islands to the north of Scotland. If you're interested in finding out about cycling Shetland and Orkney, go back and listen to episode 81 of the podcast, which is perhaps what I need to do before I head up there on the 14th of August. So thank you for listening and happy cycling.